dedicated session on energy now, so welcome back. As we've heard in the two previous sessions, this is a complex and important area, both for the accession process, but also for Ukraine's immediate energy needs. The Russian aggression has very much targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure in order to cripple the economy and terrorize the population. We saw the occupation of the Zaporizhia nuclear plant very rapidly after the invasion 2 years ago, and there have been repeated and continued attacks on energy infrastructure of all kinds, electricity substations, gas pipelines, and so on. Now, the Ukrainians have been working very hard and all the time to simply restore the energy infrastructure in order to bring power back to the population. But it's getting harder and harder to deploy these short-term fixes and, of course, more expensive. Plus, there's the fact that the Ukrainian energy sector, the whole energy system, the infrastructure is from the Soviet period. Some of it needs upgrading and updating, and it definitely needs a vast improvement in energy efficiency. So there are both short-term fixes and needs to replace damaged infrastructure, but there are also longer-term needs in order to upgrade and decarbonize the energy system of Ukraine. So I'm very glad that we have a chance to talk about the necessary investments from all different sources with two great experts. One is my colleague Georg Zachman, Senior Fellow at Bruegel, and I should mention he is a co-author in the paper that's come out today from Bruegel. I'll hold it up and show it. This is low-tech version. Ukraine's path to EU membership and its long-term implications, a study that was led by Zsolt Darvas, who chaired the previous session. So Georg is an expert on energy of all kinds, and he's worked particularly on Ukraine, has just set up a new think tank in Kiev on these matters. And then we have online the president of the Dixie Group, of Olena Pavlenko, who I'm very glad is able to join us from Kiev. It looks like we have a good connection as well, so that's really super. So we're going to start with just a few points from each of them to set the scene and give their key priorities for the investment needs of the Ukrainian energy sector, where the money should come from, where it needs to go, and so on. And then we'll go into an interactive discussion where they can bring out more the greater depth of their analysis. And of course, we'll have a chance for all of you to ask questions too. You can begin formulating your questions as they speak on Slido using the hashtag Ukraine. You can do that also if you're in the room. But I'd like to invite Olena to start with just a few points to set the scene, and then we'll go into the discussion. So the floor is yours.
Thank you.
And
thank you very much for your kind... Yes, thanks a lot for the invitation, and my warm greetings to all who is in person in the audience, and to Georg for his constant support to Ukraine and long-lasting cooperation. Yes, I have a few slides happy to share with you and comment very quickly. Can you see them?
They'll be coming up in just a minute. Go ahead, Olena. We will see them,
Thanks.
But you can start speaking. Yeah, here we see them now.
Yes. Great, thanks a lot. So maybe I will start from a bit of overview what happened to energy system after the full-scale Russian invasion. So on the left, you can see how much capacity we have as of now in comparison to the February 2022 when the full-scale invasion happened. You already mentioned the capturing of the nuclear power plant. We have a lot of attacks on our thermal power generation. We have lost a lot of wind generation because it's either destroyed or it is located on the occupied territories. We do have some possibilities to use hydropower plants. We do have some solar generation, but again, we lost a lot of our capacity, almost 50% of our capacity we have lost already. In terms of the energy infrastructure, more than 40% of the high voltage network of our transmission system operator was damaged. You remember that last year we had constant blackouts and outages regularly. in Ukraine because Russia actually targeted networks, transformers, auto transformers, and talking about the transformers, again, almost half of them were damaged or destroyed, and you can see at the picture how the destroyed transformer looks like. And the estimated war-related revenue losses, according to the World Bank assessment, is already more than $50 billion. We didn't have a lot of investment during the war period, but we did have a very good support from our international partners. I will just mention the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, which was established with the support of Energy Community Secretariat, European Commission, and now a lot of donors joined to provide equipment to Ukraine's energy sector, to energy companies. Thanks to this fund, a lot of energy companies had the possibility to replace damaged equipment very fast. As of now, we have more than 347 million euros deposited by donors to be able to quickly restore the energy infrastructure and equipment. Again, a very quick overview. Just a few weeks ago, the World Bank published the new assessment report about the damages. And if you look at the general reconstruction needs are more than 486 billion. But if you look at the energy sector, you can see that what is needed is 47 billion just for the reconstruction. For the 2024 solely 1 year, we need more than 2.7 billion euros. And again, this is just to recover from those damages which we had and have now. But the government just added 3 more points. You can see them. We'll not discuss a lot on this. So just to show one of the priorities for the government is construction work in nuclear sector, because Ukraine would like to focus on nuclear sector in the future, to do some recovery work with the oil refinery, and do more work to protect substations. Just an explanation or an example how Ukrainian cities at the local level are trying to deal with the reconstruction. In a short term, they have 3 elements of their policy. One is the backup generators and different equipments in case of the damages, to be able to produce electricity somehow from the locally. Switchover plans, again, to be able to switch from one generation to another, and modular boiler houses. But if we talk about the reconstruction, most of the cities now and communities are focused on the development of their local energy plants, with switching actually from fossil fuels to other types of to green fuel, right, to biomass or to any other sources. And also there are some discussions on using geothermal, renewables, and other sources of generation. My last slide will be, not the last one. The slide will be on investments in energy sector. I would like to underline that despite everything what we have now, we do see some examples of investments in Ukrainian energy sector. Ukrenergo is doing, our transmission system operator, is doing a very good job with incentivizing more investments into the energy storages, and there is an initiative from the Swedish company Ingrid Capacity to install some capacity in Ukraine. But also Ukrainian local companies also started to realize some projects. EBRD is doing a huge work with providing a lot of loans to Ukrainian energy companies. And here there's an example with Ukrhydroenergo. And also renewable companies, despite all the problems, all the damages, we do see some installations, even including new installations in energy sector. Just yesterday, we had a very good discussion with energy companies, and they said that The wind energy industry has increased in generating capacity by 238 megawatt. And in particular, in 2023, 146 new wind farm capacities and 45 solar power plants were installed. Quite a lot. Although all of them, of course, underlines that if there is additional possibility, there would be more investments in renewable sector. And just as an example, in gas sector, there is also some activities there. We still propose our gas storages for the European companies to store gas, and the production goes on of gas despite quite a challenging economic situation, and the companies cannot export gas now from Ukraine. I'll stop here, and we'll be happy to discuss more.
Olena, perfect. So, Georg, tell us how to create a resilient and decarbonized Ukrainian energy system. Yeah.
Hi.
Let me hear you.
Okay. Yes. Thanks, Heather, and great to see you, Olena. Good to see you that you're in good health, and it always has a somewhat serious tone when saying that to somebody in Ukraine, which is very, very unfortunate. I would. And you will see, we did not kind of collude with Olena, because I'm kind of rephrasing some of the things that she has brought up. What I would like to line out is a bit that there's a quite complicated balancing act to which I don't have an answer, and I hope you can also help me find one. It's work together with one of the colleagues of the Green Deal Ukraine project. So before the war, Ukraine was an electricity superpower, 60% now almost of electricity production from nuclear, synchronization with the European system. Ms. Matanova spoke about how successful this was seen as an opening up Ukraine to new export opportunities. But even before the war started, Ukraine had serious issues in terms of investment into its power system. So a lot of the generation assets had reached the end of their economic lifetime, and both nuclear and especially the thermal units, there was a significant lack of flexible capacities. The distribution grids were in a relatively bad state, and then there was, of course, the aspiration to go for a green transition, because Ukraine wanted to go the European route, of course, already before the war, and the investment sums that have been foreseen for that are, of course, quite substantive. So in the orders of 460 billion euros for the climate neutral scenario, as an example. So Ukraine was in need of investments before. Now the war, as Olena pointed out, has kind of made this investment need dramatically more pressing. Demand has decreased by 30 to 35%, partly for lack of electricity, so forced outages, partly because of a drop of economic activity in Ukraine. So a lot of generation assets have been lost. Still, cross-border exchange happens thanks to the synchronization. Ukraine already started early on to kind of before the war, I think, quickly doubled renewables production and has ambitious plans now to go ahead. At the London conference last year, the energy minister presented an energy strategy with huge investment plans. So $80 billion to be invested in nuclear, 130 billion invested into wind power. And it is pretty clear that the question, where should all this money come from, is the crucial one. So in terms of public investment, I think Ukraine itself, out of own pockets, will find it extremely difficult, which is an issue because the nuclear industry is still owned by the state, the hydropower plants are still owned by the state, and they will find it difficult to raise the needed investments. Foreign donor money will only go so far. I think we are not the Ukraine plan has some 50 billion euros for 7 years. So that's the order of magnitude maybe that we are talking about, not only for energy, for many more things. So it's not going to come from Western donors. Private investments in Ukraine, there is kind of essentially one electricity company that might be able to raise money on the market, and also has enough kind of political connections to be able to manage some political risk. This has, of course, consequences for the future of Ukraine's energy system, because it will imply further monopolization. Because if there's only one company that can invest all the time, then this will be the one company that will kind of dominate the market. Foreign companies currently are active in specific sectors, but they can only manage some risks for minor projects. So you have to go to very specific projects where you have a direct customers that pays you, but going through the state institutions, through the markets, through the regulated system, you cannot put huge amounts of money on the line unless you have some backing as an international financial institution through political anchors. So risks for going into Ukraine stay big. The war risk is significant. My understanding is you can protect against the war risk with insurance, but you have to pay huge premia for that, and they are not necessarily taken by the host country. So if you get a Hermes coverage for your investment from Germany, then you have to pay still the premia yourself, which kind of makes most projects unfinanceable. There is one very odd risk, that is the drop in demand in Ukraine, plus the massive amount of power plants that actually still exist in Ukraine, and the power plants themselves have been damaged but not destroyed. What has been mainly destroyed is the transformers. Is that 1-2 years after the war ends, a lot of capacity might come back in Ukraine and might wash away all your investment plans, which is a kind of very unfortunate risk for any investor that might come in with a new technology and invest there. And then there are all sorts of regulatory risks that partly have to do with the war, like currency control, partly are kind of part of the longer term things. So the challenge that I see is Ukraine essentially, and together with essentially the European Union and all the donors, has to balance addressing the short-term needs, because Ukraine needs power now. They need to make sure that the economy keeps going, because otherwise they cannot produce the drones and the ammunition and all these things that they need to do. So we need to find quick solutions to keep the system running and get up again. But those short-term solutions might, both on the technology side, be quick and dirty. So there's an interesting study coming out at the beginning of this year by the Danish Energy Agency and Minenergo that say, okay, maybe refurbishing some coal plants makes a lot of sense. It's dirty, but it's done quickly and it produces a lot of electricity quickly. But that doesn't go down well with the European view of how the future of Ukraine's energy system should look like, for good reasons. And also, so that's on the technology side, but also on the ownership financing model. Yeah, we can try to channel it all through local incumbents and state-owned companies. That goes quickly, and potentially through regulated asset-based models and things that are outside of the market. But it might, in the future, kind of prevent the development of more market instruments and kind of for the big money that needs to flow into Ukraine, the hundreds of billions in electricity system investments, that is not going to be the future answer. So this balancing act is challenging. My kind of generic answer at the end to that is, I mean, if donors help, they should put a premium to more sustainable solutions, but not kind of only finance the sustainable solutions, but also keep these short-term solutions that are just needed right now in place. Thank you very much.
So, thanks very much, Georg. Those are two great overviews of how what the challenges, which are enormous, both on the short term and also on the long term. I'm hoping that we will get Elena back on the screen in just a minute. There she is. Excellent. So I'd like to ask you both about the interaction between the accession process and the development of the energy sector. We heard in the previous session from Ambassador Matanova about the additional support that the EU is offering to Ukraine. And as she pointed out, there's both going to be the pre-accession funds and also some kind of multi-donor mechanism, which is outside the EU framework. Then there's the question of private sector investors. And as Georg said, they need to mitigate their risks, both war risks and also local market risks. And there's the potential that the EU extension of the EU regulatory environment will give them some more predictability on some aspects of the energy transition, plus also the EU encouraging decarbonisation efforts. And perhaps it would be interesting to know what you think are the opportunities for using the accession process more to help to de-risk investment and also to incentivize the right kind of investment for both the short and the long term. So how do you see that interaction between between EU accession and the development of the sector? Elena, would you like to start?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. Maybe I'll start from saying that Ukraine is, as a future member of the EU, Ukraine will have to meet all the plans and targets which EU put up and set up for all the members, including the decarbonization issues and the climate targets. So to do so, Ukraine already included most of these targets, many of these targets, let's say, into its national energy and climate plan till 2030. If I may just again show you one more slide, because it will help to understand where the investments will be needed. And then I will say a few words on what types and where we could take this from where we can take this, get this investments. Do you see the slide? Can you see the slide?
Yes, we see it now. Go ahead.
Yes. So if you can see that if Ukraine goes with the EU targets and is trying to rebuild the economy already with so-called build back better principles, and in accordance to the EU targets, we will need quite a lot of investments in the ambitious scenario. It will be much more higher than 100 billion euros. And you can see here actually what exactly sectors will need the most investments. That would be transport, that would be power plants and batteries. Industry will need a lot of investments, because we have to, if we want to still produce steel, we will have to produce green steel. The decarbonization of heating will be a huge sector for potential investments, and we still have to develop measures and policies to incentivize investment in that sector. And building stocks, how to increase energy efficiency and energy saving there. Still huge potential to invest, and also to develop incentives from the government perspectives as well. Now, regarding the sources of investments, in addition to what we already are discussing and trying to negotiate with the EU, which is access to the EU facilities and possibilities to work with the same sources of money which other EU members have access to. There are also the needs to have access to war guarantees. Some of the countries already provide such support. I think the UK, France already, Germany, they are issuing war guarantees for the businesses who would like to invest in Ukraine. We also are discussing as a think tank, and we have a number of think tanks in Ukraine who are working with international donors and are trying to develop such initiatives as Debt for Climate initiative, which means that probably Ukraine will not pay part of its debt, but instead will use this money for the green recovery or green reconstruction. within this NECP priorities. And I just would like to echo what Georg said regarding the IFIs and the needs, short-term needs, long-term needs. You remember that most of the IFIs, they are not allowed to invest and to provide loans into any fossil fuel sectors. So gas, which most of the developed country already recognized as will remain the transition fuel, and not only for developed countries, but for developing as well, and for Ukraine, I believe as well. So Ukraine will not be able to get any loans on gas sector. If we are talking about gas production, still will be quite hard to negotiate even on transmission and distribution, I believe, with the IFIs. So I think the revision of some of the policies and making it more mild conditions to work with Ukraine on reconstruction in different sectors in energy, I think would be necessary for the future. Thanks a lot. We'll stop here.
Georg, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, first of all, I can encourage everybody to have a look into the draft NECP that Dixie, to a large degree, prepared or supported the ministry to work with, because there you get an overview of essentially the existing policies and the planned policies in Ukraine in a very condensed, still I think several hundred pages long format. But I think it's all in one place. You asked for the EU as a potential anchor, and I think that is true for three reasons in my view. The first one is the funding reason. So we have the EIB, partially the EBRD, and also the member states that will lend money also based on progress towards EU accession, and that will hopefully help to improve also the regulatory stability in Ukraine that is crucial for the investability of this sector. So if you can be sure that your renewables investment, you will get the tariff that has been promised by the government, which was not always the case in the past, because then otherwise the EBRD will complain in Brussels about it. That is a relatively strong anchor, and it helps to bring down the capital cost in Ukraine quite substantially. The second anchor is market integration into the European market. And now we have the synchronization, but the linkages are still relatively weak compared to what is technically feasible. I mean, Ukraine has been connected to the other countries in the Warsaw Pact by 750 kV lines. So these are huge monsters of energy that you can kind of really transport electricity versus several nuclear blocks through one line. So that is, those lines are partly in place, but the technical limitations on them are still there because of the uncertainty of the system and the system state. And I think here more can be done, but then that will have implications for the continental European markets. Because that is a lot of electricity that will potentially flow in one or the other direction, and that can help Ukraine as a substantial buffer, because you can potentially do investments in Ukraine on the back of export potential. But it's not just a technical issue; it's a political and economic issue as well, where Europe can help Ukraine a lot. And the third one is the accession process in itself. So here, of course, we can go through the list of obligations in a rather bureaucratic way and tick off boxes and say, the letters can be interpreted in the same way as the European legislation, or one uses that to really try to help investors to make sure that Ukraine becomes an investable case, together with Ukrainian partners, to really reform the Ukrainian legislation in a sense that it becomes investable. So I'm thinking, for example, of unbundling rules for the distribution system operators. Rather technical issues, but if you would manage to push that through, all of a sudden these distribution system operators might become investable. Currently, nobody can put money into them because they are owned by some shady businessmen that are not getting any money from any West European bank. And here, some rule changes can help a lot, and their stricter focus on outcomes in the accession process can also help to make this sector investable.
Last point you just made, it's really about making sure that the EU side sequences the demands in the accession process. So in terms of opening the energy chapter, not just simply opening it the way that's happened for other countries, but really sequencing the taking on of different parts of the regulatory framework in the right sequence for Ukraine's needs and to provide the right incentives for investment. This is a really key point because that's something that is in the hands of the Commission. They can decide how to do it. I hope they're getting some very good advice on this. I think it's also important that this is made public because much of the negotiations tends to happen behind closed doors, but investors actually need to see the EU is asking for this, therefore Ukraine is going to reply, therefore this is what the framework will look like, and that will incentivize it. So we can see a good, strong need for coordination between the external communication as well as the actual negotiations. So we have a question online via Slido, and I encourage you all to put your questions on with the hashtag Ukraine, and I'll come to the two that are in the room as well. So the first question is, what hope for renewables in Ukraine? As I understand it, permitting for example, onshore wind has actually gone rather fast during the war. So some of the obstacles which we see typically to renewables build out in the EU maybe are less in Ukraine. But then, of course, there are constant damage to renewables infrastructure as well. So would either of you like to take up the renewables question? Go ahead, Elena.
Yes, I'm happy to start, but I'm sure Georg knows a lot as well. So on renewables, yes, you are right. The permitting always can be better, but the biggest problem for renewables in Ukraine, especially solar wind, this is the debt which is on the market. And this is where the renewables do have a lot of negotiations with the government, how to get the money back from the previous period. But if you analyze the last 2 years, as I said, after the full-scale Russian invasion, if we have the occupied renewables and the destroyed renewables, but at the same time, we do have some activities among the renewable companies in order to come to the energy market, to sell the electricity, even bypassing this special regime for the renewables, but just trading the electricity as an equal, let's say, market player. They also are trying to involve more investors. I would say that the biggest project now, which started was launched already during the full-scale invasion. It was DTEK and Vestas, the new wind farm, which is going to be one of the biggest in Ukraine. So the process goes on, but what we are discussing now that we still need some more incentives, because Ukraine put the target 25% of renewables in electricity generation in 2030. It's high share. We have to be very active in order to reach that target. And for that, we need more incentives, not as generous as we had with the previous feed-in tariff, but we still have to think how to improve the auctions, to start the auctions, improve the auctions, and how to use the best experience to push forward the renewables development in Ukraine.
Georg?
Yeah, I can only echo Olena. I mean, the potential in Ukraine is huge for renewables. You have a very, very, very big country, and you have good sites for wind, you have good sites for solar. In principle, kind of Ukraine would be able to manage to supply domestic needs much easier than some more densely populated countries in the European Union. And on top of that, Ukraine has those nuclear power plants that probably are going to stay. So therefore, Ukraine's challenge is a bit to think about what to do with the abundance of the electricity that is being produced from nuclear and renewables, which is an odd thing to say at the current situation. But if you try to project some 10 years ahead or so, then questions arise of whether Ukraine tries to develop a more energy-intensive industry domestically to make use of this resource-rich, or whether it's trying to export this energy, and in which form, so through hydrogen or through biogas or through electricity. This uncertainty, of course, is not making things currently easier, because on the one hand, we now have this urgent need to do investments into things, while in the long term, kind of, it looks like there is room for abundance.
Yeah. So this is a very bright point about Ukraine in the future. So we're coming to questions in the room. Could we have the microphone over here, please?
Currently at Ruth Pedersen Public Affairs and formerly EBRD. A couple of comments on the energy mix for Ukraine. I fully agree that the country is a powerhouse for renewable energy. Actually, EBRD was and still is a big investor in solar and wind. However, two things. One on gas. Actually, yes, EIB cannot lend to gas for their energy strategy, but actually EBRD still can with some caveats. And actually, I was checking, and they recently lent 500 million euro in 2 tranches to Naftogaz last year and the year before, so a rather substantial amount to support gas reserves in the country. And actually, they received some grants and guarantees from the Norwegian and Dutch government, as well as the FSD Plus guarantees here in Brussels. And the second point on nuclear, to what extent you think also EBRD will start financing more and more small modular reactors in Ukraine, given also their changing policy that we see? Thank you.
Okay, so a question about gas and one about nuclear. Also tricky issues, because Ukraine is certainly intending to completely remove its dependence, end its dependence on Russian gas, I believe by the end of this year, possibly even sooner. Maybe you can comment on that. But of course on nuclear, Ukraine, like other countries, for example France, does depend on Russia for supplies of fuel and indeed technical assistance and so on. So these are very tricky issues in the context of the war. Georg, would you like to start?
Okay, I will not comment on the SMRs, because that won't make me many friends. On the gas issue, by the end of the year, the gas transit contract will end, and Ben McWilliams, a colleague, just did a little back of the envelope saying that if you use Ukrainian storages, it will still be possible to kind of supply Central Eastern Europe, so which is otherwise a bit in trouble. So Ukrainian storages are important. The nice thing about that would be that kind of the storage services might bring to the Ukrainian budget a similar order of magnitude in terms of income as the transit revenues. Would be interesting to hear maybe from Olena whether you have looked into that as well. My understanding is that Ukraine itself is not kind of dependent on any imports from Russia, but the cost, of course, when kind of the gas is delivered from the sea through LNG and then through the long distance pipelines through Europe, if all the transit countries take a bit of money out of that, then the gas is going to be pretty expensive. And I think that's the discussion that is currently popped up in Brussels, that it might not be fair to make Ukrainians pay for German LNG terminals, but that is a challenge in terms of tariffication that needs now to be resolved.
Thank you, Olena.
Yes, happy to start from the dependency. And thanks a lot for raising this, because it's interesting. Ukraine is not dependent from Russian gas. We actually are not buying Russian gas anymore. I think since 2014, we just transited for some of the EU countries who still need Russian gas and buy Russian gas. And we agreed that we will, so the transit contract, as Georg mentioned, will end this year, and we do not have intention to continue this. So I think, or I hope, that the transit through Ukraine will stop. On nuclear dependency, we did use Russian fuel, and some of our power plants, nuclear power plants, still use Russian fuel, nuclear fuel. But I have to mention that Ukraine was the first country who started the experiment to replace Russian fuel with Western fuel, which is Westinghouse. And we are successful with that. I think we will be able to, not fully, but to the large extent, to replace Russian fuel in order not to be dependent from it for the future. So again, this is quite a good case or experience how you can actually, even in nuclear sector, become independent from Russian influence, which then have impact on your national security, not only energy but also national security. On the question on EBRD and loans to Naftogaz, yes, EBRD was working with Naftogaz a lot and with Ukrgazvodobuvania a lot. I cannot say 100% what is the scope now. I think the policy of not lending in gas, oil and gas sector and fossil fuels, it's a sort of, transitional. They didn't do this decision in one night. And I think I have to check what exactly was the loan to Naftogaz, whether it was regarding production or it was about some technical work. Or I know that Naftogaz is working a lot on methane emission reduction. This is something what international partners can fund. But again, methane emission reduction is definitely necessary. But again, taking into account the war situation, we also need investments in production, in transportation, in distribution, in such things. And again, maybe we have to check with the BRD, but the World Bank, IFC, they have a very clear instructions. They cannot invest into such things. And on SMRs, also very good question. Again, we have to check. But my understanding is that IFIs, at least World Bank and IFC, they cannot support or provide loans for nuclear as well, which is again very funny. Yes, if you just remove the topics or sectors where IFIs cannot work with, you remove gas, you remove oil, you remove nuclear, and you just actually have to deal with solar, wind, biomass, hydropower, all types of renewables plus batteries. Again, if you are in the war and you need all types of mix and you have to be flexible and you have to ensure the reliability of your system, sometimes this is not enough. And the more flexibility from donor side, I think would be very much appreciated.
Okay, so some big challenges for multilateral donors. We have another question on Slido, so the hashtag is Ukraine, about what could motivate foreign private investments in the long term. So moving away from the complexity to the sales pitch and thinking about what could be those motivations to take advantage of the very abundant energy potential of Ukraine. And there's also a question about to continue replacing Russian nuclear fuel with Western sources and to implement a new Ukrainian national power plants. What kind of financial or regulatory support would be needed? I think you could take that question as what do you think to be most relevant? Would you like to start us off, Georg?
Yes. So, I mean, on motivating investments into Ukraine, the EU accession process is, as we discussed before, kind of the main promising route for Ukraine to go there. It provides guidance on the future energy system implicitly, on what is going to be needed. It provides some more security in terms of the regulatory framework. It provides funds. So if we manage to align things around the EU accession, then we have a sort of an investment plan, and as I mentioned, Olena worked quite substantially with her great team on the National Energy and Climate Plan, coming up with some ideas on how such a EU-compatible system could look like. And as I understand, this is also then linked to the Ukraine plan and the 50 billion. So there is some commitment from the Ukrainian side to not completely bypass that. On top of that, of course, there is the hope of exports from Ukraine, but I think we need to understand what is realistic and what makes sense. So Ukraine can be easily self-sufficient if the investments come. Ukraine can also be a massive exporter of implicit or explicit energy, so be it green steel or be it electricity. But Ukraine is a country that has very high capital costs, that has huge investment needs for the foreseeable future. And the question is, which of those very capital intensive things are going to come there? And probably it's a process. I mean, if you look into the accession processes of Poland and Romania, you see really like this exponential curve, that trust is being built, institutions are being built, and then with time, things become possible in terms of FDI inflows that you have never thought before. So there is an exponential story into Ukrainian energy if things go right, but it also might not go right. And I think it's the job of everybody in Brussels working on that, and in Kiev working on that, to make sure that the framework conditions are set, that we are getting into this exponential story.
Yeah, you might describe it as a virtuous circle between making the right kinds of investments in the sector, because you know that EU accession will definitely bring Ukraine into this regulatory framework and with these commitments on both sides. And then meanwhile, the investment itself then catalyzes further reforms which help to embed that framework. Yeah, I mean, that worked very well. Poland, we've seen it not working in countries in the Balkans, so we know it can also break down. So it will be really important to have both sides motivated and maintaining the momentum. Olena, would you like to come in on that, and also this question of what kind of financial and regulatory support would be needed? I mean, that's from the EU primarily because of the accession process, but maybe also from elsewhere, maybe also from other multilateral donors.
Yes, happy to comment on both. First, on the investments, what we have now and can be used for the investments. Ukraine has quite a good workforce, which is relatively cheap, but with a good knowledge. Yes, we do have a good industry. We do have an experience in production. We have a lot of engineers. So you can build some already good industrial projects already in Ukraine right now or right after the war. We do have a common border with the EU, which also I think is also a benefit for potential investments. What is needed, and Georg mentioned this, we need a more stable regulation so investor can calculate its strategy, and we should not change our policies so fast. We do need also, but that would be probably the homework from the EU side, quite a good negotiations regarding the accession agreement, because if we are in a bad condition as a result of these negotiations, if there are a lot of barriers for the trade, I don't think it will help us with fast economic development of the country. We do need possibility to export easily biomethane, not the case now. We do need the possibility to increase the capacity of the electricity export, import, and the possibility to trade as much as possible. The same, I think, for gas. Again, we do have a gas production, and as far as I understand, the government is going to develop the export of gas from Ukraine to the EU. Renewables projects and possibility to sell electricity to the EU. So all this, if we have really good conditions to trade between the EU and Ukraine, I think will be a good basis for the investments and a very good sign for the investors to come. Regarding the nuclear power plants, I think this is first the homework for Ukraine. We have to implement the corporate governance reform for our Energoatom nuclear company, which is state-owned. We should ensure the companies who would like to work with Ukraine in nuclear sphere. Those are the US companies. If we talk about small SMRs, small modular reactors, the US companies already are trying to develop some cooperation. But we should first show and as you said, build trust that in nuclear sphere, despite it is fully state-owned, we can allow investors to make money, feel safe, and plan in the long term. Which means that we should do the corporate governance reform. I think we should change our legislation in some way, and also regarding the SMRs as well. We don't have the legislation in place. And yes, and build more partnerships with both European and the US companies in nuclear sphere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. So we're coming to the end of our time. And we've had a lot of information this afternoon. And I just wondered if you'd like to finish off this whole event, because we've also discussed a lot of other issues, as you both know earlier in this afternoon. You both know Ukraine very well as a country. You also know the EU. You've done a huge amount of research into energy, but also it's the energy politics as well as the energy sector. What are your hopes for the future in terms of how the politics around energy might go positive? Georg, you mentioned the risk that, well, the EU might not welcome all this abundant electricity coming from Ukraine if it's there are also EU member states which want to make sure that their renewables generation gets privilege. There are also all of the, on the Ukrainian side, Olena has mentioned the various hurdles because there are interests in the current system to be maintained rather than changing it to a new one. So very interested in your closing thoughts on what are the bright spots looking forward. In particular, I mean, one of the points you made just now, Olena, about the skills of Ukrainians, the abundance of technical skills, the fact that there are a large number of engineers, there's a kind of human resources. There are also labour shortages, and the reconstruction effort will require a large number of people. But are you hopeful that energy could be one of the powerhouses of the reconstruction effort? Olena, do you want to start? Just your thoughts.
Thanks a lot. Well, so much to say. Sorry. So energy sector already is actually one of the most developed sectors if we talk about Ukraine's accession to the EU. So we have to be sure that while we are discussing the accession of Ukraine to the EU, the energy sector will keep being a great example how such integration can happen. And I really believe that we do not have a lot to improve in terms of our legislation to meet all the EU targets and demands. But we have to work a lot on the implementation, and this is our part of the work. And we have to engage more, I would say, capacity, knowledge, communication, coordination among the government ministries to ensure this proper implementation. But again, if we talk about the EU homework, or I'm sorry for saying this EU part of the work, this negotiations process, really, it would be helpful if it goes smoothly, if Ukraine is not treated that it's just yet another country, but all the conditions where we are now, I mean, the work conditions also will be taken into account. It doesn't mean that we will, we will come and fail. And we heard such issues regarding the ENTSO-E integration, and that Ukraine will just make a problem for all the EU electricity system. You can see now we integrated, we are fully synchronized with the ENTSO-E, and we are not creating the problem. We even export electricity and support each other. So I'm pretty sure that we can show the same great example for all the energy sector integration. And we all are working on this. But just please take into account and don't forget that the country is in the war. We spend 50% of our budget for fighting with Russia. We have a huge poverty, and everybody is working not 24 hours, 48 hours every day. We are ready to work and reform, but all these issues also should be taken into account. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, couldn't agree more. Georg.
Yeah, if I would have to, in 2 sentences, to kind of summarize the afternoon, and thanks a lot for spending that time with us, would be that we have agency over the future. So in terms of sanctions, we could do more if we wanted to. There are still options to do more, and it can make sense. If we want Ukraine to access the European Union, there is no insurmountable issues there. There are things that need to be worked on, but it's there are solutions to that. And in the energy sector, there is not only things to kind of muddle through, but even a story at the end of the rainbow to work towards. So we have agency to move things both in Kiev and in Brussels and wherever. Future is not set, but there is also a lot of hard work, and like Lena said, with the massive work that the colleagues in Kiev are doing, hope we can mirror that on our end of the trade.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree with you more. It's extraordinary. Every time I visit Ukraine, I'm amazed by the incredibly hard work that Ukrainians are putting into both maintaining daily life now to winning the war, but then also thinking about the future, trying to do all those things at the same time, and that should motivate us here too. So thank you very much for spending this time with us this afternoon, Olena, and sharing Dixie Group's excellent work in this subject. We really appreciate it, and we hope you've gained a few insights as well. Thanks very much to my colleague Georg, who's also, I should just mention, has written a number of papers on this subject, which you can see on the Bruegel website. And thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, and stay safe.